It's more about the idea of you've got to look at whatever your reality is, and then you've got to say, how do I work within the realm of that reality? And people understand. It's kind of along the lines of I wrote a post one time called "We're All the BBC Dad Now," and you can probably remember that video, right, where the guy, he's doing the BBC interview, and then his kid busts in, and then the other little one busts in, and then the mom comes in and pulls them all out, right? And the thing is, before this all hit, that was like, oh my God, I can't believe that guy didn't have his door. Why is he doing this from home? All these things we would all these assumptions we would sort of bring to the table, and all of these judgments that we would bring to the table. But now I will not be in a situation where I'm doing a video call or having something where my, 9-month-old and doesn't end up on my lap, or my, almost 4-year-old comes running into the room and decides to, pull out my sound or something, like any number of things will happen, and people just have to understand that now, because that's the world we're living in.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to another episode of the Play Your Position podcast. Today is game day, which means I have an incredible guest. He is suited up, ready to take the field. He is going to share with us his perspective on how we can play a bigger game in our lives and our businesses, our careers. He is a really, really fascinating individual, and I know you're going to get a lot out of what he shares with us today. His name is Michael Roderick. Michael, are you ready for kickoff?
Oh, yeah.
I am too. I'm really excited. So here are some things that I know about you, Michael, that I just want to pass on to Team PYP. When Michael went from high school teacher to Broadway producer in under 2 years, people started to ask him how he managed it. Michael began his career as a high school English teacher before producing Off-Broadway and then on Broadway. This combination of experience in the arts and entrepreneurship led him to starting an arts incubator program to teach more artists about building and growing their own businesses. Eventually, he decided to develop a workshop on networking, which grew into a full-time consulting practice, and that became Small Pond Enterprises. Now, during this time, he did take a short break to work as the VP of Operations and as a Director of Business Development for a New York City ed tech startup, which introduced him to the New York startup community. And most recently, Michael founded the Connecting Connectors Conference, which is known as ConnectorCon, and he is also the co-host of the Access to Anyone podcast. So I love when I get to talk to experienced podcasters, Michael, because number one, you love showing up to the mic, but number two, you understand what an audience looks for and wants to hear during one of these conversations. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I am too. And so you're coming to us from New York City. And New York City was at the epicenter a few short months ago of this global pandemic that we are still experiencing in a way that I don't think any of us anticipated it was going to stick around this long. And so could you expand on what I shared just now about what you're doing in the world?
Sure.
Are you... first of all, we know Broadway is not Broadway right now. And There are people listening who may be artists, writers, producers of some kind of something. Bring us into Michael's world in September 2020. What's happening?
Sure.
What are you seeing?
Yeah. So, it's really interesting because I've actually had a lot of conversations with a lot of different artists and creators and people who work in the industry. And while there is a lot of trouble, while there are a lot of challenges in terms of you're not really able to do a show right now, there's not a lot that can be done in sort of the traditional way. It doesn't mean that the industry has stopped. And I think that that's probably one of the most important things to understand. The execution part of everything is on hold and is being dealt with in, the ways that it needs to be dealt with. And it's very possible that depending on how long this continues to go, that structure of how performance happens may not be the sort of natural way. But there are plenty of people right now who are exploring what are the other ways that we can do our work. So there are plenty of people out there who are putting together plays and readings and presentations via Zoom and virtually, and looking at what the opportunities are. Now, the challenge that comes up is that live entertainment isn't just the actors and the audience, right? It isn't just that that team. It's all of these other people on more of the technical and sort of on the ground kind of side of things, including all the different industries that are attached to that. So the travel industry is really affected by all of this. Because a lot of shows, basically most of Broadway's capital comes from different tourists buying tickets to these shows. Like, that's where most of the shows make their money. So that market doesn't really exist right now. The theaters are not open, but a lot of producers and a lot of people are working on things that will start to look at, well, what are the other options? And I think that's really at the heart of what I think is most important to recognize. I think right now it's really important to understand that the way that you've done things, the model that you used, may not be the model that can be used for a really long time. So it's worth it to ask yourself, what are other models? What are other things that I can do at this stage in the game? And I honestly think really, there's two types of people that are sort of going through things in the middle of this pandemic. And I did an entire solo podcast about this on my show, where I talked about the fact that basically we have people who are hiding right now and who are basically saying well, this is what it is, and I'm just going to kind of, wait till the storm passes. And then we have the people who are showing up. And the people who are showing up are saying, okay, if I can't do it the way that I've always done it, what's the other way that I can do it? How can I start to think about this now? What types of things, can I do? How can I shift what I have to offer and what I have to put out into the world, and use the tools that are at my disposal? Use what I have as opposed to being worried about what I don't have.
Yeah. And what kind of feedback are you hearing from people, let's say in the performing arts, because you are immersed in that community? I've seen little snippets. I've seen some news stories about, at the high school level anyway, the theater arts, the kids are getting creative where they're picking a play or a musical, and then each person involved in the characters is self-filming their part, and then there's a production team that's putting all those pieces together and then offering it to the community down the road as a means of entertaining. There would be a small fee that you would pay to access. So there's some money generating there. But in general, outside of, do you think that this is the model for the foreseeable future where we're going to be streaming? I think of a show like Hamilton. How could Lin-Manuel Miranda pull off Hamilton today? Given you think so?
Yeah, because the thing is, the only difference is what people see as the reality, right? So ultimately, the reality right now is that we can't crowd a theater. So we understand that, that particular dynamic. So I think honestly, if if we were back at the beginning of Hamilton, like if we were back when Hamilton was at the public in June, July, and August, right, when they were starting, and we looked at it as this summer, I wouldn't be surprised if Lynn found a way to use all of these digital platforms to still make the show happen, and
right.
partner with the public to make it happen in that particular dynamic. Because one of the things that he's proven is that he will push against whatever the sort of status quo is within the theatrical world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he is an innovator.
Exactly. So I really just think that it's more about the idea of you've got to look at whatever your reality is, and then you've got to say, how do I work within the realm of that reality? And people understand. It's kind of along the lines of I wrote a post one time called "We're All the BBC Dad Now," and you can probably remember that video, right, where the guy, he's doing the BBC interview, and then his kid busts in, and then the other little one busts in, and then the mom comes in and pulls them all out, right? And the thing is, before this all hit, that was like, oh my God, I can't believe that guy didn't have his door. Why is he doing this from home? All these things we would all these assumptions we would sort of bring to the table, and all of these judgments that we would bring to the table. But now I will not be in a situation where I'm doing a video call or having something where my, 9-month-old and doesn't end up on my lap, or my, almost 4-year-old comes running into the room and decides to, pull out my sound or something. Like any number of things will happen, and people just have to understand that now, because that's the world we're living in.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what it comes down to. When I used to do a lot of work with artists, especially when I was helping them develop business ideas, I had this exercise that I would do with them where I would basically say, okay, take out your wallet and put it on the table. And they take out their wallet, or the person, they put it on the table. And then I say, now imagine you have to get through the rest of your day without it. How are you going to think about that? How are you going to make it work? And the interesting thing that a lot of us forget about is that when we have constraints, it increases our creativity.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes. So give us my mind is racing right now. I'm thinking, how would I get through my day without my wallet? And the first thing, obviously I have my phone, and through my phone, I have all kinds of ways of, if I needed money, I could access it that way. If I had to actually buy something, also I could call somebody and get them to, there's lots of people that love me that would help me out if, again, I'm assuming that the wallet is just for money, right? So that's an interesting, because the wallet isn't just for money, right? It's for, it has our driver's license. So
it has our identification in it.
Yeah, our ID. Yeah, that's a great, I love that thought process. And so for you as a person now, you're no longer teaching in a high school capacity. Would you take us through when did you get the call? I call it the call to leadership, to step out of what you were doing into a completely different space. Could you take us through that?
Sure. And interestingly enough, I've had a lot of those calls, right? I've gone, the joke I make is I've lived about 17 different lives to this point. But the school dynamic was this. I was on the subway and I was reading Seth Godin's book, Lynchpin. And he has this section in the book where he basically talks about the fact that the way that school was constructed, it was built to actually make us good factory workers. So the idea was that if we sat kids in rows and we told them to, follow the rules and keep their heads down and do the work, that by the time they got out of school, they'd be willing to keep their heads down and do the work and work in rows in factories, right? And one of the things that he brings up in the book is that that model was sort of falling apart because the factory worker was in some cases being replaced by technology, in some cases being, brought to this level of like making next to nothing. Like you couldn't make a living as a factory worker, as a commodity anymore, right? So he was bringing up the fact that, if you are just a cog in a machine, then you're replaceable. And the idea was that you didn't want to be replaceable, that you wanted to be the linchpin, that you wanted to be the person that people would miss you if you were gone, from the organization. And I had this moment while I was reading all of this where I thought about education on the scale of being a high school English teacher. And ultimately, what I was always graded on as a teacher was whether or not my kids got through a standardized test.
I know.
And that's really all that mattered, right? And all that mattered was I got a certain percentage of kids to pass some test that didn't prepare them for the world that they were about to go into, that basically just got them to memorize things and then forget them. So I just sort of had this moment where I said, you know what? I am a very good teacher. I've always, I call it my white label skill. Like there are certain skills that you have that you can pretty much bring to pretty much any industry. And, in my case, I have always been a good teacher. And I realized that I could just keep going through this cycle of getting kids through a bunch of standardized tests and covering the same things over and over and over again, year after year after year, or I could step out of that. And I could start teaching things that were interesting to me, start teaching things that mattered to me, start teaching things that would make a difference. And when I realized that, I decided to leave my teaching job. And my teaching job was a very, very secure kind of job. It was very structured. It was very much like I was very well liked at my school. So it wasn't really a matter of like, I didn't really need to worry about being fired or replaced or any of those types of things because I was at the top of my game. I was the head of the English department. I ran the drama program. I never was called into the office. You know what I mean?
To see the principal.
Exactly. Like that kind of stuff never happened.
Yeah.
So I would, so it was a very, very secure position. But the thing was, I knew that I was not going to be happy, right? And I was not going to be fulfilled if I didn't sort of make that leap. And what I realized was there are people in the world who needed to learn the things that I could teach, and they would pay for them. So I just had to spend time figuring out, like, well, what is the structure of that, and how does that look? And so I left teaching, and I started, the whole like entrepreneurial journey, right? And making my own way in the world.
And how long have you been at that? Give us that time frame, if you would.
Yeah. I left education back in, was it 2000, probably 2011, maybe?
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And then I ended up doing the work in the startup. I was on my own for about a year, and then the startup scooped me up and wanted me to do business development. So I sort of jumped in there and I did that. And then during that time, I went to a really bad conference. They had sent me to this conference that was just, poor.
Yeah.
And I got back and I was just like, you know what? The conference model is really broken. People don't really talk to each other. There's a lot of silos. There's a lot of just lack of connection. So beginning of, or sort of the end of actually 2012, I was still working in the tech startup, but I ran the first ConnectorCon, where I basically brought a bunch of connectors together and did panels on what is best practice in developing partnerships, building relationships. And I had a bunch of people after that conference say, you need to keep doing this work. This is really, really important. You need to keep teaching these methodologies and these processes. So in the beginning of 13, I think it was January 13, I left the educational technology startup, which again was another very steady, if you're working in a company that's selling software that's backed, you don't really have to worry too much. And again, I left that and decided to kind of go off on my own. And I ran the conference for a number of years. I hosted some events for a number of years. And then, life happens. My first kid was born.
Yes.
And,
that changes everything.
It totally does. It totally does. And, in this particular instance, my first daughter, Juniper, she was born not breathing. So
wow.
We had actually 5 weeks in the NICU where we weren't really sure, what we were going to be dealing with. We really didn't know sort of how extreme things would be. And she's always just been a little rock star, and she pushed through it. And 5 weeks later, we were out, and she has her challenges, she has her issues, but from where we were to where we are is just absolutely amazing. She's she's our little miracle. But during that time, business was not going to happen.
Right, absolutely
there
not.
Was just not going to be, anything. So I took a lot of time to reflect and think about, the things that mattered and the things that I wanted to do. And luckily I had, a number of people who over the years I had helped and I had supported, and I had done, a lot of good for, and many of those people were supportive during that time when our basically no money was coming in, right? You had, you just had to sort of be with your family. And if it wasn't for a lot of those people just, supporting me and helping me through that, I don't know what I would have done.
Right.
But by the time I got to, through to the other side of that, I now had a very, very clear picture of what I wanted, in terms of in terms of business, how I wanted my time to sort of be, allocated. And I also had, a lot of time when I talk, what I like to talk about is that when we have hard times in our lives, those hard times give us tools that not only help us in the future, but help a lot of other people in the future. So I was able to take a lot of the tools that I, gained through that experience and be able to help a lot of other entrepreneurs through their tough times and their challenges in the coaching and the consulting work that I ended up doing after that, and still continue to do to this day.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
What are some of if you give us maybe an example of one or two of your favorite tools so people have an idea? Because whenever I think of tools, my brother is in construction, so I think of the tool belt, right? Or his tool, all the tools lined up inside his trailer, the hammer, the saw, the drill, the nails. I mean, they all serve a purpose. So out of that traumatic experience, and let's put it as it is, that was incredibly traumatic to go through as new parents and not know from day to day what's going to happen, and to then witness the power of your daughter, who clearly is meant to be here. I mean, it's just, it just gives me chills. As a parent myself, I can relate to just that it's, you become Papa Bear or Mother Bear, right? It's just, you drop everything to protect and do what you can for your baby, But if you could share a couple of the tools that you have found to be useful, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, sure. So there was something our doula said to us when we were pretty much just Juniper was taken out of the room immediately, and we had a good couple of hours before they came and told us what was going on. And I remember our doula said something to me where she said, some people will say, like, you take it day by day, or you take it, you live life day by day, or, those types of statements. And she said, right now, you really are going to be living minute to minute.
Oh, yeah.
And, the thing that taught me that was so powerful and that I've taught a lot of other clients is the fact that you can't get yourself lost in the past and you can't get yourself lost in the future. And that was the thing that I had learned in that experience. If I had sort of gone to the past and tried to be thinking the whole time about, what could we have done, right? Which there's nothing you can do to sort of prepare for those types of things. It would have driven me nuts. And if I had spent all of my time trying to think about the future, right? And think about what's it going to be and how's it going to go and what's going to happen and all this other stuff. Again, it would be agony. But if I could just be in the moment and process whatever information was coming at whatever time, then that was going to help me move through. And a lot of the time, when one of my clients will come to me and something did not work the way that they wanted it to, or they're not happy about a particular scenario, I really have them focus on, well, what do you understand in the moment? What can you do right now? What makes sense right now? Stop worrying about what happened. Stop worrying about what's coming up. What can you do in this moment? How are you going to handle it? And that's been one of the best tools that I've ever, that I've personally had, but also that I've been able to share, with clients and
I love
help them
yeah.
kind of understand that concept.
It is a concept, and it is not something that, unless you happen to be raised by people that teach that in the home, it's, going back to your description of the school system. And I would say, I put money down quite a bit that 100% of people listening to us talk right now went through a school system that was designed for a different era. And I'm also a product of the New York State public school system, having grown up on Long Island. And I have both of my parents were educators. My father, his entire career, he started I think he was 22 years old, fresh out of grad school. And he served his entire career in the same building, in basically the same classroom, and you don't hear about that much anymore because that model no longer exists. We are, as humans, making different choices, maybe having a career in one thing and then completely stepping into, as your story goes, something else entirely. And yet the school system, I have two children that went through it, and I have a nephew who is 15 years old. He's starting his sophomore year, I think next week. And the school system where he's at, also in New York, is looking at a hybrid model, which is partly online, partly in the classroom. Nobody really knows how this is going to play out. And my point in all of this is that if you have a tool that can be applied in any situation, like slow down minute to minute, it changes, it can almost instantly relax you and take away the anxiety and the concern about, well, what about this and what about that? And what if this happens? Well, you don't know. You just minute by minute. It's a great tool. Who teaches you, Michael? You're an amazing teacher, and you help a lot of people through the programs that you've developed. I'm sure former students sing your praises because you showed up for them, and that's what great teachers do. Who do you look to for coaching and mentoring to help you become the best Michael you can be? Yeah.
So it's really, really interesting because I think that there's a misconception a lot of the time that the mentor is just like this sort of magic, like Yoda like figure, right? Where it's just like, you have this one person who ends up being your, the one who teaches you everything, right? And the way that I look at it is, it's more like you kind of have you have tons of mentors, right? And those mentors teach you in various ways, and they become part of your life in just different in different capacities. So there are people who I've learned so much from their information and from the things that they've shared, but I haven't interacted with them a ton, right? Seth Godin is one of them, right? Seth has certainly mentored me through many of his books, right? Through many of the different themes of his books have basically been a part of me, like in my life, and being like, oh wow, yes, this is a new way to think about this. This is a new way to look at these things. And I've certainly, I've met Seth a couple of times, and we've always had like a good conversation, but it's not like I'm sitting there, with a notepad, right? And being like, tell me everything about the world, kind of thing. So I think like, his work has always been very, very influential. I also have a friend who has really been just a great mentor in lots of different ways, both through his own writing and also just the conversations that we've had, named Brian Kurtz. And Brian was one of the first people at Boardroom Inc., which was like a pretty large-scale direct marketing agency. And then he moved off onto his own and started a company called Titans Marketing and does a lot of stuff with direct response. And Brian was one of the first people to introduce me to the book Breakthrough Advertising by Gene Schwartz, which is arguably one of the best books to read if you want to understand the idea not only of copywriting, but also just the psychology behind it. Like, you really want to understand why people buy and what we do and sort of how to think about it. That book is a phenomenal tool. And Brian was the first one to sort of introduce me, to that world. So, those are two of the people who sort of immediately come to mind. But I could, I could rattle off.
Oh, sure.
Like
absolutely.
20, as you can probably imagine.
I can. Of Seth Godin's books, what is your favorite? I'm also a big fan, and I'm always curious for when I meet other people who are in Seth's world. I presume you have listened to his podcast, Akimbo.
Yep.
And he runs a program called the Alt MBA, which I see he's a pioneer, and I see that becoming the model for education moving forward, which is exciting to me as also a lifelong educator like you. But is there a book that you just absolutely turn to again and again? Is it Linchpin, or is it one of his others?
So I often reference Purple Cow. I used to use
Purple Cow.
Yeah, I used to use Purple Cow with my seniors, and I would have them read it before they wrote their college essays.
I love it.
Yeah, it was just one of those things where the simplicity of Purple Cow is what I really enjoy. I think like as time has progressed, it's one of those things where as time has progressed, Seth has, branched into so many other things, right? And
he has.
And now his books are very, very rich. And, I think the most recent one, This Is Marketing, is, dense if you really think about it, right? Like there's lots of things that you have to kind of dig through. And while there's great information, it's very, very useful. I think that a lot of the time, if you are trying to get into something, you never want to feel stupid, right? Like if you're trying to get into an industry or you're trying to learn something, it's hard to get into it and suddenly feel like, oh man, there's so much to learn or there's so many things to cover. So what I really love about Purple Cow is its simplicity. It's a very, very straightforward kind of book that will just help you understand why certain companies have in essence stood out, right? Like why they have, caused people to look and sort of pay attention, and also what you can do to add that to your own work, right? How you can incorporate those things in your own work. So that's the one that I usually lean on, because I think like it's kind of like a book like that is the gateway drug, if you will, into a lot of the other heavier
I love that analogy. It is. In fact, I haven't read Purple Cow for several years, and I'm going to pull it down from my shelf and reread it. You've inspired me. And team, if you've never heard of Seth Godin or any of these books that Michael is talking about, of course, I will have links to them on his show notes page over at pyppodcast.com. And also links to his blog, which he writes daily. And, he's somebody that if you are wanting to expand your way of seeing the world, Seth is a leader he really is one of our living philosophers, I think.
Yeah.
He's super smart about business, but he also goes high level and asks big questions about ultimately, what does any of this mean? Which is what philosophy is about. Why are we here? What are we doing? How do you find that fulfillment and joy in life that balances out between the stuff that's hard? Because life isn't always going to be easy. And, we know the world is changing. It's changed dramatically. I'm curious, when you look into your crystal ball, Michael, what do you predict? Let's talk about education, since that's the lane you run in, and so do I. What do you think the education model is going to be in the next 5 or 10 years? Are we going to go back to all these buildings and these college campuses that exist and just kind of slide back into the way it was? Or do you see something else happening?
I see something else happening. And basically, I think, the way that we were doing education before made sense for convenience, right? So like, if you have thousands of kids taking a test, you're not going to read thousands of essays. Like there's just going to be people who are like, I'm not going to evaluate in that particular way. They're going to want to evaluate in a numbers way. They're going to want to evaluate sort of the simplest, right? Because you have a massive number of people that you sort of have to evaluate, right? But the thing is, we no longer really seem to care that much about those evaluations. The last time I looked at where somebody went to college as a marker of whether or not they should be recommended for something or hired, I can't even remember. Right?
That's a good point.
I have no, I think like at some point, maybe you might still you might still kind of go, if somebody says Harvard. But I think that's only because Harvard has made it a point to have that brand of being a prestigious university in multiple forms of media, right? Like, I don't think we would even think that much of Harvard if it wasn't for the fact that almost every TV show, comedy series, etc., makes fun of the idea of like going to Harvard, right?
Yes.
So I think like, because we are in this world of these things are not that important anymore, right? The sort of traditional evaluation tools aren't as important anymore. I think we're just going to kind of keep splintering when it comes to education. And I think what it's going to eventually sort of morph into is that people will gravitate towards the things that they care about learning. And they will learn those things and they will develop those skills that basically, they will figure out, like, will people pay for it? And some people will create businesses and some people will be part of those businesses. But ultimately, I just don't think, we're gonna have a world anymore where it's like you go to this school, you get out of this school, you get a job, and then you stay in that job for any length of time. Like, I don't think I don't think either of my daughters are going to have like a steady job. I am convinced that what will likely happen is they will both have probably 6 or 7 or 15 jobs or become an entrepreneur in some capacity. Mm-hmm. I sincerely doubt that the world we're heading into is one in which there's going to be the job that you're in for life. And I could be wrong about that, but I think we are heading into a time where people are going to be looking based on their interests and based on what excites them, and that is not going to go away. And I think like the more that we try to force people into, this is a curriculum, like this is what you have to study, I think the more challenges and issues we're gonna run into.
I agree 100%. I fall into your camp. I do. And to me, it's encouraging and exciting because having worked inside of a highly structured system known as secondary education here in the United States, and then also I worked within higher ed as well, I just saw how flawed that system was because it was designed to meet the needs of only a certain percentage of student. If you were a certain type of thinker, you could easily sail through and do very well and then get into that assembly line of you graduate, you go to college, you graduate, you get a job. And that is not how many people are built. And there needs to be, I've argued that for years. There needs to be a way of meeting more of the needs. And so what you just described to me fits that. It'll be interesting to see what happens. So thank you for sharing your prediction.
Sure.
And we're at the part of the show I call Touchdown, Michael. So work with me here. I'm putting you in the red zone. Okay. And there are less than 30 seconds left on the clock. You are down by 4 points. It's third down and it's now or never. Could you please tell us a story about a time when you ran the ball into the end zone for that game-winning touchdown?
Okay. So there was a point in which money was super, super tight and the business was not doing very well. And I had just come off of an event and was, dealing with a lot of debt. And I was on my way to my wife's family's house for, I think it was for Thanksgiving or something. And I was on the bus. I was coming down after everybody else because I had, a bunch of work to do. And I decided to just meditate. And I was just like, and I've done about, I try to do like 20 minutes twice a day if I can. With kids, it's touch and go. But I was meditating, and I suddenly had this idea that I was really good at putting people together, and that a lot of my friends really enjoyed adventure. They enjoyed like sort of random cool things. So I came up with this idea to host basically a networking event meets a scavenger hunt.
Nice.
And I had probably about 1,000 people on a list that I wanted to like let know about it. And I made it something ridiculous. I think it was like $99 or something to do it. And what it was, they would fill out a 4-part survey, and then I would use that survey to craft individualized experiences for everybody throughout that day. And give them like chances to go to like classes and be backstage at shows and like all these like cool things. And I sent out that email that weekend, even though it was a holiday weekend. And I think over that weekend, close to about 70 people decided that they wanted to do it.
Wow.
Do it. So it was like it was an instant like, oh, okay, well now we're back to, baseline. So that was a very cool experience.
That is super cool. Thank you for sharing that. It shows again that sometimes in our most desperate or dark times, we can be creative and figure our way out. So It's a great, representation of that principle that exists. So with that said, as we round things down for today, could you share with us, Michael, 1 to 3 key offensive strategies straight out of your leadership playbook that listeners could implement right now? They could take it today and start to see some kind of forward progress in their work or their life. What could you share?
Yeah. So I'll tell you the one that has worked really, really well for me. I write a daily email, and the question that everybody asks me is, how do you write every day? Like, how do you write, and always come up with something to say? And what I tell them is that I give myself permission to suck. And one of the most important things to understand is that you cannot be brilliant and consistent. You're going to have things that are going to be they're going to go really well. And then you're going to have things that are going to be kind of go moderately well. And you're going to also have things that suck. But if you are consistently putting things out there, the market is going to tell you a lot about what's working and what's not. You're going to see what kinds of responses people have to your material if you keep putting things out there. So there's the idea of give without expectation of return. I'm a very big believer of write without expectation of response.
I love that.
Don't worry about what are people going to say or how are they going to react, because you just never know. The market's going to tell you what's going to work and what's not. It's your job to keep showing up and putting the information out there. And if you give yourself permission to suck, you take all the pressure off, right? The second that you say
yes.
this could bite, this could be awful, I don't care, I'm going to put it out anyway.
Yeah.
You stop having to worry about it, right? And that ties to another concept, which is, be a student of the process as opposed to a slave to the outcome. So there are tons of people who get obsessed with the outcome. Did I make this thing happen? I call it the tennis novice versus the tennis pro approach. Tennis novice misses a shot, and usually the game is over because they're in their head after that, right? They're worried about winning the game, not winning the game. The other person's got them, right? But a tennis pro misses a shot and says, okay, I missed a shot. What can I learn? Where was I standing? Where was the other person standing? What, can I do differently? And if you make yourself a student of the process as opposed to a slave to the product, then you never fail. You just get new information. And you just use that new information to change the way that you're doing things, to try something else, to go in a different direction. So that's another one that I think is can be particularly useful that you can use right now, right? Like you can just say to yourself, am I being a slave to the product right now, or am I being a student of the process? And the more that you do that, the easier it is to overcome whatever challenges kind of come your way.
Thank you for that. I just wrote both of those down because I haven't heard it said in that exact way. And I'm always attuned to a new way of seeing, that fundamental principle of, we're all in this together. Not everything is going to go according to plan, and that's perfectly okay. And for people who would like to learn more about you, Michael, where do you hang out online?
Yeah. So I'm all over the socials. I'm on the Book of Faces as Mike Roderick because my Michael Roderick got hacked a number of years back.
Oh, boy.
So look for Mike Roderick unless you want to be sending me messages and never get any reply. And then my website is smallpondenterprises.com. And you can pop over there and, I have a daily email that I send out, so you can sign up. You can sign up over there. And like I said, I'm all over the socials. I'm at the LinkedIn if you ever want to stop by for a drink and, all the good stuff.
All the good stuff. Well, again, these links will be on your show notes page, Michael, at pyppodcast.com. So team, I encourage you to connect with guests, to learn more about what they're doing in the world. They've just given you almost an hour of unbelievable wisdom and new ways of thinking about how we can show up in a world that feels and looks in some ways the same, but in a lot of ways different. And Michael, you've been amazing today. I appreciate you spending time with me and Team PYP, and also just for you're so authentic. I love you have a great laugh, and I can tell you love your family and are committed to providing a nice life for your young daughters who are growing up in a world. Wow. Think about the 21st century, the kind of things they're going to see. It's mind boggling.
It is. It's pretty wild, especially the idea of growing up in the middle of a pandemic and not having the same levels of socialization. It is absolutely fascinating to sort of think about how that, how that shapes our lives and what things are going to look like. So yeah, it's definitely been a wild time, but
it has.
I love my girls, and I'm doing everything I can for them.
That's right. Well, that's what you're supposed to do. So thank you again. This has been wonderful, and I wish you all the best and look forward to continuing to follow your journey.
Awesome. Thank you again for having me. This was an absolute blast.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kayser. Thanks for listening.
Got a great key offensive strategy you like to share? Write to us at coach@pyppodcast.com or on Twitter, use #PYP and let us know how you're running your ball into the end zone for those game-winning touchdowns.